For our second speaker, it is my privilege to introduce Mr. Don Dix, and his lovely wife Annette is sitting there next to him. I've met Don through various programs and events and things that we're doing working together. I've asked him to give you information on the Unite IE, which he has been responsible for bringing together, and to talk to all of us on how all of our different groups can do things, make things happen like we just did with the Mike Morrell election. So at this time, my pleasure to introduce Mr. Don Dix.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. And good morning. Yeah, there's a little bit of good news. Today, I get to share with you a whole bunch of information. Some sort of revolutionary things are unfolding here in the Inland Empire. And I'm going to talk to you about those tools and how you can take advantage of them. I'm also going to talk about the threats that face our country, what you can do to help address those. I'm going to educate you about the threat of radical Islam and what you can do about that. And I'm going to do it all in 5 minutes. Maybe not. How much time do I have, by the way? 20? Okay. So first of all, I want to get, I've got a couple of questions for you. I'd like to know what you guys think is the greatest single threat facing our country today. If you could isolate it down to one thing, you can only, I know that there's a laundry list of stuff, but so what is one thing that you feel is our single greatest threat? Yes, ma'am?
Public apathy. The apathy of citizens.
Public apathy. Interesting answer. Yes, ma'am? Our president. Anything more specific? Something he's done, maybe? How about which?
How about some of the bills that we passed?
Stimulus Act, Obamacare?
Without democracy.
Oh, executive orders. Okay, yes ma'am.
Lowering our fighting forces.
Reducing our defense capabilities and national security has diminished. Yes ma'am. Radical Islam. I love you already. Yes ma'am.
The deficit.
The deficit, yes, $17 trillion, and that's only what they have on the front of the books. Yes, ma'am?
General disregard for the Constitution.
A general disregard for the Constitution. Great answers. Yes, ma'am? Socialism. Wonderful. Yes, ma'am?
Creating an upper class.
I'm sorry, say it again?
I said creating an upper class.
Creating a great underclass. Wonderful. Anybody at the back table want to participate in this? All right. Now, yes, all those things and many, many more. We could probably fill an hour with that list. Why did that happen? Whose fault are all those things that we just talked about? A $7 trillion deficit. We have laws that are passed that we could probably paint outside of the Constitution. We have national security threats, both inside and externally. We have politicians that don't necessarily uphold their oath of office. Why is that? And this is group participation as well. Why do these problems exist in the first place? Yes, ma'am. Say it again. A liberal left agenda. Okay.
I would say what Donna said.
What did Donna say?
Apathy. Absolutely no question.
Apathy. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Morality of our country. Why is that? Why do you think the morality is in decline? Media.
But just not caring is not my problem.
Not caring. It's not my problem. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
We're not united and we don't have a platform.
We're not united and we don't have a platform. Okay. Speaking of platforms, you remember what happened in 2012 during the Democratic National Committee convention? They had this little awkward moment where somebody brought to their attention that God had been written out of their platform. And it was Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa as the chairman of that day that was responsible for getting the crowd to cooperate and voting it back in. Do you remember what happened? He took 3 votes. He put the motion was on the floor, he took 3 votes. It's supposed to be a majority vote to vote this back into the platform. Or was it a 2/3 vote that was required for that? And it doesn't matter because they took an audible vote and the nays overwhelmed the yays to bring God back into the platform. So talk about morality and some other things. So we can lay this, we think, at the feet of a lot of different media. We've got politicians that we would paint into a socialist corner. I have a different theory, and I'm going to go back here to get to my notes so I can share it with you, and it embodies very much your answer. Because I would submit to you that it's not the fault of the media. It's not the fault of our progressive politicians. It's not the fault of lobbyists on K Street that get a bunch of this junk through. It's not even the fault of corporations or what we might call corporatism. It's not the university's fault that advance this and educate our kids with this, what we might call a liberal progressive agenda. And it's not our school's fault that are doing a great job now of embodying this thing called Common Core, which nobody mentioned. I submit to you that it's your fault. It's my fault. It's our fault. And I believe we don't have a crisis of leadership in this country. It's very easy to lay the blame at the feet of other people. What we have in this country is a crisis of citizenship. When I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and I was educated in the public school systems of Baltimore, in the elementary school, starting in the 2nd and 3rd grade, we had to read the Constitution, memorize the preamble, read the Declaration of Independence. Almost every field trip was to a national monument, D.C., a battlefield, Gettysburg, Antietam. I mean, the list goes on and on. I was like a tea bag steeped in that water. And I understood at a very early age what the price that the founders paid in order to give us this great gift. I understood at a very early age what citizenship was. Now, I wasn't very good at executing it from about age 16 to about the age of 50, but I understood it. What I didn't get was what my actual role was. Now, a lot of people think in this country that their role as citizen is to show up and vote every other year or every 4 years. Nothing could be further from the truth. There's a quote that I love that, in fact, Great Britain from the Redlands Tea Party shared with me. I love this quote by Judge Brandeis. The most important political office is that of private citizen. See, we have a unique gift in this country. Unlike other countries where there's a religious body or a oligarchy or a monarchy or a socialist structure with a fascist leader that sits over the people, we sit at the top of the pile. We sit directly under God in terms of, because our rights come directly from God, that is our belief system, and we sit directly under God. The government sits under us, and we've forgotten that, and we've forgotten our role in keeping that government in place, and it has gotten out of control. I was listening to Dennis Prager, I think, the other night, and he was talking about a situation in Louisiana that had unfolded. He was talking to the attorney who was representing a lady who had gone to work in a grocery store as a flower arranger. She became proficient in putting flowers together in an arrangement, and she was fined or censured by the Louisiana Floral Arrangement Commission. Did you even know there was such a thing? This was the result of the floral lobby in Louisiana, and what the result is you have to go through a course. You have to become certified to be a flower arranger in the state of Louisiana, or you can't get a job in a grocery store making flower arrangements. It's now a government-regulated position. You have to take a test, you have to get a license, you have to renew that license every year to arrange flowers. And, I could go on, I could fill the day with examples like that. But we come to these meetings like we're here today, we hear lots of stuff. It's not what we hear that's important, it's what we do. It's the actions that we take based on the things that we hear. How many guests did you invite today? My background is in marketing and sales, and a lot of times it's very easy to get discouraged in selling because you got to ask so many people for a yes, right? And you get a lot of no's and a lot of rejection. I was trained in selling that it's not the number of yeses you get, it's the number of times you ask the question that counts. Because they're all directly related to that downstream. So it's not the number of guests you had here today, it's how many people did you ask to come. It's how many people did you ask to vote yesterday. How many doors did you knock on? How many times did you pick up the phone to call a friend or a neighbor in your neighborhood to say, you know what, this is a really important election and here's why, and I will be happy to drive you to the booth. We can carpool together. How many times did we do that? That's where the rubber meets the road. A lot of people in the 2012 elections said, oh gosh, we lost that election because of fraud. I can't tell you the number of people that will tell me we lost that election because of fraud. No, we didn't lose that election because of fraud. We lost that election because we were outmanned, outgunned, and they played a better ground game getting people to the voting booths. Was there fraud? Sure. Could there have been fraud on both sides? Possibly. I don't like to spend time debating over minutia like that because I believe that we lost that election. That was our election to win in 2012, and we lost it. We lost it because we didn't have a ground game. We lost it because we forgot what was important to do day to day. We lost it because the churches in this country couldn't bring themselves to vote for a Mormon. We lost it because if you have a choice of Satan or an atheist on the ballot, who do you vote for? The churches said you don't vote for either one. I would submit to you, and there's a lot of very good pastors that would submit to you that you vote for the atheist every single time that Satan and an atheist is on the ballot. We lost it because the churches in this country have become, ephemetized, and they are allowing the government to steamroll them. They are allowing special interests to take away the voice in the public square. Christians no longer exercise their voice in the public square. We don't do it. How else can you explain we have a law that says abortion is legal in this country? How else can you explain that we have this Affordable Care Act? How else can you explain Obama? I mean, if you had a company that had a $1 trillion budget, had an immense influence in the world, and that was your company, and your task as a member of the board of directors is to hire a CEO, and Obama submitted his resume, would you have hired him to run your company? I mean, hello. I mean, there isn't a bet. You look up empty suit in the dictionary and Obama's picture is there. No experience. Never signed the front of a paycheck. Never ran a business. Never ran an organization of any size or substance. And yet, he was able to convince enough Americans to vote for him. He and his grand army of minions that went out and outflanked us, outgunned us, out-technologied us, all of those things, and won. And not just won once. And we saw 4 years of what that empty suit delivers. We voted for him again as a country. Not we in this room, but we voted for him again. So, what's the answer? How do we correct this ship? Well, I would submit to you it's not something, we in this country, we have gotten used to the 30-second fix, the commercial. I want a drug and I want to feel better now, and if you can't give it to me, I'm going to go see a doctor that will. We have forgotten that it takes decades to make the kinds of changes that have happened in this country happen. We want it now. And we're not going to get it now. We have literally allowed 100 years to go by as this agenda has unfolded in this country. Do you guys believe in divine providence?
Yes.
I do too. You know, and I believe if you're humble enough, and if you're listening, and you're willing to serve God, and willing to stand alone regardless of the consequences, divine providence has a way of working things out. If you will allow yourself to be that tool. And exactly what is supposed to happen will happen. And it will be all for His good and His work. That's why we started this country. That's how this country started. A lot of people say it was divine intervention, that our founding fathers were divinely inspired. No, I don't think that's true. I think it was divine providence. I think that these men were willing to stand up, men and women willing to stand up, put their honor, their wealth, and their lives on the line. They put it all on the line. They put all the chips right there on that, come out roll. And they rolled the dice. And it was a dice roll because, when you look into the history of the founding of our country, you realize 30% of this country was against separating from England. 30% didn't give a rip. And 30% wanted their freedom. And of that 30%, the old 80-20 rule in business, and it's true in every group. You get a group of folks together like this and you survey who's actually doing it. You find out it's the 20%, and then you further refine that down. You find that there's only, 4 or 5 of that 20% that are actually doing the work, and the heavy lifting. If we all did some of the heavy lifting, we wouldn't have the problems that we had. You ever heard of a group called the 3%ers? Today, in this country, there's a group called the 3%ers. Do you know why they're called the 3%ers? Because only 3% of the country picked up a gun and fought during the Revolutionary War. In fact, at the decisive battle, Washington had no idea when he was crossing the Delaware that at that very moment, on that very day, was the pivotal moment of the entire Revolutionary War. If they had lost that day in Trenton, we would be speaking English, the King's English to this day, possibly. That pivotal moment, Washington put himself in the hands of divine providence. And he went out and fought a great battle. And he drug 2,000, his army had shrunk from 30,000 to 2,000 people, and they didn't even have boots. They had bleeding feet on the way to Trenton, and they surprised the Hessians and the British regulars and won that battle, and that turned the tide for the entire country and inspired the entire country. Maybe Mike Morell's election yesterday is that little Trenton moment for us here. Maybe it was, how many of you heard of a fellow by the name of, gotta look at it, Steve Wagner? Is that name familiar to anybody in the room? Steve Wagner. Yeah, you don't count, Glenn. You heard me tell this story. Steve Wagner owns a trash company in York, Pennsylvania. He's a business owner, and he is buried in regulation. He is buried in government oversight. There's a special election in Pennsylvania that happened last 2 weeks ago. And Steve Wagner ran as a business owner on a platform of limited government, personal liberty. What's the third one? I forget. Limited government, constitutional limited government, personal ability, and free enterprise. Duh. So, and he ran. And he ran as a write-in candidate in a county that uses electric voting booths, where you have to go through several screens and then key in the name of your write-in candidate. How many people in this room could successfully navigate that kind of a computer system to correctly spell his name and vote him in? He was opposed by a Democratic sort of regular and a Republican old guard regular. So it was the three of them in this runoff race. Now, In the weeks leading up to this, his Republican opponent ran an attack ad. Remember Paul Ryan when he was had that ad that he was pushing Granny off the cliff? That was the Democratic progressives that ran that ad against Paul Ryan, right?
Yes.
That was the opponent. His Republican opponent ran an attack ad showing him pushing Granny off the cliff because he sued an elderly lady for her back trash fees that she was legally required by the city that she lived in to pay. She hadn't paid it. He sued. She paid. And they ran an ad with her and I think maybe her son or husband saying, Steve Wagner, Scott Wagner, I'm sorry. Scott Wagner pushed me off a cliff. That was the Republicans attacking Scott Wagner. He won with 49% of the vote. He is now one of Pennsylvania's newest senators in their special election. That's good news. You heard about David Jolly in Florida. That's good news. You heard about the mayor in San Diego. That's good news. And we are in a year where we can create more good. That good news just doesn't happen. When you hear the results, you didn't also hear about the hundreds of people, 700 is what I understand for Kevin down in San Diego, that walked house to house to get him to vote. The work it took. You don't hear about that. So I would submit to you that we have forgotten that there hasn't been anybody who has been a sentinel, a watch person on the wall. We have abdicated that role. We have not done everything we need to do. And I'm saying that to me, about me as well. Up until 3 years ago, I voted, but that was it. I didn't understand what politics was all about. Cicero said in, I think this was like 500 BC, a quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't remember it exactly. But he said something to the effect of, you either take an interest in politics or politics will take an interest in you. We've got to start telling the youngins about that because they've got to understand. I had my haircut 3 weeks ago by a 21-year-old that's never voted, never read the Constitution. Her father was a cop, didn't understand the Second Amendment, didn't understand what her rights were, didn't understand anything. A 21-year-old raised in the Corona Norco Unified School District, and her father was a police officer, and she didn't understand her rights under the Second Amendment. That is an epidemic across this country that we have to fix. How am I doing? I have 5 more minutes?
Yes.
Okay. I could use 2 hours, but... We have a great story to tell. We've got the greatest story the world has ever heard, and we have the story of real freedom that the opponents of our belief systems can't tell. But right now, as we speak, that dream and that story is being choked by a mountain of government regulation. It's interesting now with technology. I'm going to talk about something in a moment, a radio show that we have been blessed with. The ideals of our founders only dreamt of or right within our reach because we don't need a middleman anymore to get the word out. You know, we don't need a radio show to be heard. We can do a podcast from our mom's basement in our underwear with a cell phone and thousands can hear it. Technology has broken down the barriers of the middleman that have prevented us from getting our messages out. So we can print flyers. We can use amazing technology to help get our message out. But we have to know the story. We have to live our lives in a way that we're worthy of telling that story, that we're examples of what we're asking other people to do. You know, the highest form of hypocrisy is to tell someone else what to do without doing it ourselves. And sometimes we can be guilty of that. So, you know, it's interesting because, you know, there's a lot that happened. And did anybody see the video clip of Valerie Jarrett on television saying that premiums have gone up less than they've ever gone up in 50 years. Now you're laughing, and we know it's a lie, and yet she's up there saying it. The journalists aren't challenging her on it, and she gets away with it despite the fact that we were told that the ACA, aka Obamacare, would reduce our costs by $2,500 a year. And yet she's now saying they've gone up less than they've gone up in 50 years, which, you know, on the face of it is a lie. But that's not even what they set out to do. Thomas Edison said that with the invention of motion pictures, you will never be able to put a lie past anyone. How wrong he was. Because there's a crisis of citizenship in this country. We're not doing what we need to do. So what do we need to do? 3 years ago, I was introduced to the threat, the national security threat called radical Islam, or political Islam, if you want to be polite about it. I actually now believe that it's those that are most adherent to the doctrine of Islam that are the threat, and it's the billion or so followers that don't really read the Quran and don't understand what's in it that aren't the threat. But the ones that understand what's in it are a threat. That's the guys that flew the planes into the Twin Towers. Those are the guys that head up the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Those are the guys that are heading up every major Islamic university throughout the Middle East. Those are the guys at the top of the pile in Iran. Those are the guys that are at the top of the pile in Saudi Arabia. And I can go on and on and on. There, you know, and you know this, when you go to church every week and then all of a sudden you see, where did all these people come on Easter? Who are all these strangers at Christmas? You know, Christians are guilty of this too. I mean, but it's just human nature. It's not about Christians, it's not about Muslims, it's about human nature. So we know based on human nature that there's a vast majority of them, the 80% of the Muslims, that aren't going to follow this. But it's those 20%ers that we've got to be very careful about. And it's the 5%ers, or the 3%ers, if you want to use the model here in America, it's the 3%ers that we have to be deadly accurate in defining and isolating and condemning, because those are the ones that want to take our lives. Those are the ones that flew the planes to the World Trade Center. Those are the ones that founded the Muslim Brotherhood and lead it today. And yet, you know, how many of you heard about the news that came out of Egypt 3 days ago that the Egyptian courts had condemned to death 529 leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood? Did you hear about that? No, what you heard about was a plane that they still haven't found. Tragic, yes. The most important thing? 1 minute? Thank you. Absolutely not. So with 1 minute, I'm going to educate you about everything that you need to know in order to accurately communicate the threat of radical Islam. Probably not. These two books that are on the back of the table are the single best books that will help you to understand what this is all about and help you to communicate it to other people. This is a movie called The Jihad in America, The Grand Deception. Now, in Egypt, they've outlawed the Muslim Brotherhood. In Saudi Arabia, they've outlawed the Muslim Brotherhood. They're considered to be a terrorist group. Guess what? Our administration still is engaged in regular conversations with the Muslim Brotherhood. In fact, invites them into the White House. In fact, has appointed documented members of the Muslim Brotherhood to high national security positions that should require what they call an 86. It's a Form 86 that you fill out in order to get a top security clearance. But this documents the Muslim Brotherhood in America, that they are alive and well and weaving their political agenda within the highest levels of our government and our national security apparatus. It's by a very great man, Steve Emerson. He heads up something called the Investigative Project on Terrorism. This book was written by a fellow by the name of a doctor that goes under a pseudonym because his life is under threat, a doctor out of Tennessee named Bill Warner, thank you, Bill Warner, and he and his group Tennessee was one of the first states to ever pass an anti-terrorism law, and it was directly from his work that did it. He went through the legislators' offices, noticed the piles of stuff lying around, and said, they're not going to read my pile of stuff, so he condensed the threat of Sharia law down to this definable book. So this is the single best book on understanding the threat of Sharia law in this country, and it's very real, especially when you recognize that the Virginia legislature just passed a resolution commending the mosque in Fairfax, Virginia, I forget the name of it, that where two of the 9/11 hijackers were based out of, that supported Anwar al-Awlaki. And the Virginia legislature just passed a resolution in their government commending this mosque that is the hotbed of Muslim activity in the country. Now, I always like to end up with a call to action. What can you do? Hopefully everybody has gotten a flyer for this radio show. Last year, one of the challenges I had in talking about radical Islam is that nobody wants to hear about it, particularly politicians who regard it as being a politically toxic topic. None of them wanted to meet with me. So last year I was sitting around talking to a bunch of other leaders of other conservative groups, and I said, you know one thing we don't do here in the Inland Empire? We don't talk to each other. We operate like little pockets of resistance in our communities all over the Inland Empire. We don't talk to each other. We don't coordinate our activities with each other. And we don't share what works, what the best practices are. There's a group right up the street, the Redlands Tea Party Patriots, and they have regularly about 200 to 250 people come to their meetings every once a month. Why do they have 200 and then the little Tea Party over in Riverside only has 10? Why doesn't every group? I mean, you got to acknowledge, even in communities like this, there's probably thousands of people that are yelling at their TVs and radios in your communities, and they're angry and they're upset. They don't know you're here. You got to get them on board. We came up with the idea of organizing a group called Unite IE last summer. We started meeting in September. We officiated the group in October, and in November, a radio station called KTIE, which is Your Inland Empire Conservative Talk Radio, with Rush Limbaugh in the morning, Dennis Prager in the afternoon, and Hugh Hewitt in the afternoon, Dennis Prager in the evening. They came to us and said, we heard about what you're doing. We'd like to give you a radio program. That's divine providence. I could have never done that. If I had set out to have a radio show, it would have crashed and burned a long time ago. That's not something I could pull off, but God could, because we put the right things in the right places. So every Saturday we meet on the radio to talk about what's going on in the country and in the community with a local slant, and we advertise your meetings on that show. So what you can do is you can let everybody in your community know, hey, you've got a brand new place to tune into on Saturday, or they can go to our website and listen to the archives, and every Saturday we will announce the upcoming 2 weeks, the meetings that are taking place all across the Inland Empire. And then talk about some other noteworthy news. We had Mike Morell on the program 2 weeks ago. We had this fellow, Scott Wagner, on last week. So you can go to the archive, listen to our Saturday program, and hear all about Scott Wagner in his own words. The website is here. And then in January, I'll finish up with this. In January, we were asked by KTIE, we're going to do 2 town hall events this year. They've done them in the past. They draw thousands of people. We're going to do 2 town hall events this year, and we would like to do it under your banner highlighting your groups. Hello? So on May 17th, we have our first town hall meeting. Our first confirmed keynote speaker is Ann Coulter. This is your meeting, by the way. This is your meeting to invite people to get them off the couch and get them plugged into your meetings. The other guests were 75% confirmed is Catherine Engelbrecht. You know who she is, right? King Street Patriots, and she was the one that was targeted by the IRS and the FBI, the ATF. She testified in Congress, so we're very close to ironing out the wrinkles to get her there. Tim Donnelly will be one of the speakers. We're hoping to get Neil Kashkari. It'll be a day-long event at Cal Baptist University from 9 in the morning until 3. It'll include lunch. We're hoping to do it for around $25 to $30. It will be the recruiting event of the year to bring people down. It will help you position your group for the primaries that are coming up and whatever elections in your area that's why we chose May 17th, because it's 3 weeks before the primaries. Thank you very much. Appreciate the time, and good luck winning the battle. And use these tools. And don't forget the book and the video in the back. Thank you so much, Lynette.
Great. And Mr. Dix is going to be videotaping us also as the meeting proceeds. So don't be surprised if we are on his video. Thank you very, very much. Did we learn something? Is it exciting? Yes, indeed. Thank you so much.